Live from the 4th floor of the Cole Center on the campus of Cleveland State University, it's the Cauldron Mailbag Netcast. Here's Cauldron Arts and Entertainment Editor, Faith Lorraine.
Hello and welcome to the Cauldron Mailbag Netcast, episode number 2. I'm Faith Lorraine, the Arts and Entertainment Editor for the Cauldron. Today we are going to be interviewing Professor Paul Skalski on video gaming. Let's go see what he has to say. What is the name of your video gaming course?
It's called Video Game Entertainment, and that's the name I used when I developed my first games course in Duluth, Minnesota. So right now at Cleveland State it's a special topics, subtitled Video Game Entertainment, but I'd like to turn it into a regular course at some point.
And what different games do they play?
It depends on the topic for the week. We cover negative effects of games, for example. I'll have them play violent games, talk about violent games. We get into a whole section on online gaming and social gaming, so I might have them play an MMO like World of Warcraft, or an online first-person shooter game like one of the Halo games. And then with history, what we've been doing is, spotlighting some of the best games on each console, and also the worst as well. We talked about, the big video game crash of the early 80s, and what led to that, and there were some really bad games like E.T. on the Atari,
Right.
Atari Pac-Man, horrible games, and the students got to play them and see just how bad they really are. So we've been playing a lot, and it's fun. And I also let the students pick some games too. They have to lead discussion at various points, so let them pick games and demonstrate games that tie into the week's topics. So.
What kind of careers would your students be ready for after they take your course?
There are a lot of jobs in game development now in the games industry, and I think one of the skills that the companies are looking for, I actually heard this from somebody that works at Electronic Arts, is they're looking for people who have good communication skills. So just coming out of a good communication program can be helpful and get people into various companies in the game industry. But also I think this course will open them up. Maybe it won't be all they need, but it could open them up to some things they didn't think about in terms of careers in games. We actually go through all the different roles in the development of a game. We go through different careers and things, and get into a little design. So I think based on this, people can actually go into other courses. And, this is kind of the introduction, but it's a foundation would be for other courses in gaming that can get them other jobs. But I think just coming out of a communication program can be very good in itself.
How did you get into video games and wanting to teach about video games?
Well, how did I get into video games? Well, pretty much my whole life I've been playing. The first time I saw, I think probably the Atari 2600, or no, it was actually earlier. I kind of was born at the time Pong was born, the first big video game, and there were a lot of dedicated Pong video game systems, and I remember just being fascinated by that from age 2, 3, and then I got into the Atari, and I've kind of grown up with games. I've loved games my whole life. And I ended up pursuing degrees in English and communication. When I got to comm, I saw that they were studying media, but nobody was studying video games. At the time, I was a student here at Cleveland State in the early 90s and late 90s as well. But when I went for my PhD at Michigan State in 2000, the guy that I was assigned to work with, Ron Tamburini, ended up being my advisor. He said, we're going to do some research on video games and video game violence. And I was like, wow, I didn't know you could study this in communication, but 8 years later, it's become a huge area of communication study. One of the biggest communication organizations, the International Communication Association, just added a game studies division, which I helped found, and it's become a really big part of communication. And I hope to bring that here to Cleveland State. I want to, have not just one video games course, but eventually if we could have several courses, maybe a whole sequence, a minor or something, I think that'd be very beneficial to our students who, are just as interested in games, I think, as I, have been my whole life. So, yeah, that's basically how I got into games.
How do you think video games have an effect on the media and on social behavior?
Well, I think there is some evidence that games can contribute to hostile and aggressive behavior. But I think there's a problem in the way the media reports that people understand it, and in how groups talk about the issue. Some people are, of the opinion that, all violent games are bad and they're going to have a strong effect on kids, especially people in the games industry. People who are fans of games will always say, well, no, there's no harmful effects. And I tend to base my opinion on this in the scientific literature, which I am contributing to. I'm a social scientist. I do research on video games, including some research on the effects of violent games. And again, there's some evidence that certain people can be affected negatively by violent games, but it's very dependent on individual differences. Not everybody will be affected the same. Some people may be positively affected, but there is some evidence that violent games can lead to some undesirable behavior. So it's best to be cautious about this, and I try to be on the fence about it because I'm a fan of games. I love a lot of violent games, but at the same time, there are some populations, some people who may be affected by violent games, like children especially. I think there's a lot of concern about, but heavy players, other people as well may be affected. So it's something I think that the concern is somewhat warranted, and there certainly are a lot of violent games. If you look at the content analyses of games, most games do have some violence. So it's something that the industry has to work on. But overall, it's a difficult issue. I guess that's my bottom line on it. It's hard to.
I see you have some video gaming books behind you, and I was just wondering if you could share a little bit of information about those. Yeah,
well, these are the two books that I assigned to my students for class. This one came out in 2006 called Playing Video Games, Motive Responses and Consequences. And this is an edited volume that has chapters from mostly communication scholars about various topics of interest to communication scholars about games. It has a lot of empirical research on use of games, effects of games. So this is a book that I've been interested in for a while. I actually have a chapter in this book, so that's one reason that I've always been excited about it. But it's also a really good book, and it's a little advanced, though, I think, for undergraduates. So I also, this time, for the first time, I signed a second book. This one just came out. It's called Understanding Video Games. Just came out this year, I believe. And this one has more pictures. It's more reader-friendly. And gets into some issues that this one doesn't. This one it comes from more of a critical, cultural, perspective than like a scientific perspective like this book. So gets into some different issues. But together, I think these are pretty good books for class. And then I also have a ton of other games. I have game books, history books. I've always been fascinated by that. I have a good one called Game Over about the history of Nintendo. How it came from like a playing card company into a big, huge video game company. Review books, some scholarly books on games. And there aren't that many, but I've tried to get them all as they come out, so I'm trying to get as many game books as possible and try to read them too, which has been a problem because I don't have a lot of time, but I'm trying to get through all that. So yeah, a lot of books on games. I mean, it has happened probably the last 10 years where there's scholarly books and serious treatments of game history and things. So it's an exciting time to be involved in gaming studies.
Great. Thank you, Professor Skalski.
Right, sure.
That was our interview with Professor Paul Skalski. We want to thank him very much for participating in our Netcast. Look for another episode next week of the Cauldron Mailbag Netcast. Keep it metal.
Thanks for joining us on the Cauldron Mailbag Netcast.